Well, thank you for staying tuned. Now, moving outside our shores and telling you that the United Kingdom is a highly developed nation that exerts considerable international, economic, political, scientific, and cultural influence. Comparing its economy to the pre-pandemic levels, UK GDP in Q1 of 2023 was 0.5% lower, and in comparison to Eurozone GDP, it's 2.4% higher than its pre-pandemic level. For 2022 as a whole, UK GDP growth was 4.1%, with service sector dominating the economy, contributing 82% of GDP, followed by the financial services sector. But let's talk more about what is playing out generally in that economy. And to discuss this, I introduced him earlier. He's a startup founder, the Wealth Hackers, Mr. Olubenga Onifade. He joins me from the United Kingdom. Thank you so much, Mr. Onifade. It's good to see you today.
Good afternoon.
Yes. First, I want to start with the risks of UK's recession. As we move on, it still seems like the country could still slip into recession, considering some of these challenges that you face as a country. Take us through some of the happenings in recent times that could lead to this development.
Sure. For a snapshot, if you look at the UK economy at the moment, the inflation is at, it's still quite at over 30-year high, which is hovering at just around 7.2 compared to the target of 2%. Mortgage rate interest, is still very high, even though it's just dropped slightly. But if you compare it, according to the data provided by the Office of National Statistics, it's still at a 15-year high. I think if everyone could recall late last year when we had a tumble, or early this year, late last year when we had a tumble with the previous Prime Minister Liz Truss and the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, introducing that mini budget, which some people regarded as a fiasco, really. And the pound went to an all-time low. So inflation is actually back to that same level and actually got worse. Again, we had strikes as a result of high, cost of living, which have to mean that the government, which is trying to save the economy, trying to generate some money for the economy, have to dip back into the economy to try and compensate all these people who are going on strike. Again, so also there's the PMI, which is the Producers Manufacturing Index, which is actually still very low as well. And of course, I think if you look at all data, according to the World Bank, they've always had this, ugly projection of the UK with things going wrong, and of course the UK leaving Brexit. It's always going to be an overhanging effect on us, unfortunately. And this time around, it looks like they're getting it right. We've got a 60% of slipping into a recession. The banks are. No, the banks are not exactly passing on the rates because they need all this money, even though they're generating, exactly record profits. But at the same time, most people are now taking, on the micro side, a lot of people are now taking loans and credit cards just to pay off their bills. So this thing is passing on, and it's actually a bleak outlook at the moment, unfortunately.
Indeed, bleak outlook. Now, let me identify some of the challenges. Just like you said, Brexit, COVID, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, tightening of monetary policy, which you expect another rate hike very recently. But it seems like the rate hike is not addressing inflation, even here in Nigeria.
It's very hard. You're trying to use a hammer to kill an ant in a way. Most economists would argue that if you're looking at the rate hikes, it doesn't exactly solve that inflation problem. We're talking about 1920 economics, and we're still applying it 100 years later. But one of the famous statements of John Major was that if it's not hurting, then of course it's not working. And again, sometimes the government, they tend to run out of ammunitions, and they just think, we're just going to keep piling on the pain, piling on the pressure. The more people feel the pain, the more they will, and unfortunately, as a result of rate hikes, it does have its adverse effects. It's a catch-22, really. The more you increase the interest rates, the more companies cannot borrow, which means you cannot grow because companies need this money to grow. But if they're going to have to pay extortionate rates, unfortunately, compound their problem as well. And UK hasn't actually exactly got a lot of partners at the moment. It's not part of the EU bloc, which is which is an adverse effect. It's not exactly getting some of this fuel, which helps the economy, the oil, which is getting at a very cheap rate from Russia. It's not helping now. Unfortunately, we just politics compounded recently. We just had an unrest in Niger. So there's a bit that adds up to all these things, and UK is not exactly in a great state. So UK's got multiple problems. It's trying to build relationships, but at the same time, it's trying to compound with what's going on out there in the real world. So Russia hasn't helped. Rate hikes hasn't helped, coupled with unrest at home. So I forgot the question now. So to the common man, it's difficulty, but at the same time, oh yeah, you did ask if it was working. I mean, we could see, because I think we went to a high 11% at some point, a few months ago, but now we're at about 7.2. It looks like it's working. Inflation is getting a bit sticky. It's just taking too long, and it's taking too long. One of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's pledge was that he will get the inflation down to, it would halve inflation by the end of the year. We've literally just got another 4 months to go, and inflation is just proving stubborn. With the CPI due in a few more days, and you're right. If you look at the global statistics, even UK's growth projections actually more than 16 times worse than Nigeria's progression, than Nigeria's outlook, which is actually a big shame. But unfortunately, inflation is not one thing you just hit with a hammer and it just goes away overnight. No, it doesn't work that way.
Let's now look at the impact on of price of this expensive energy, food, housing cost, and of course higher debt on the masses. How are they managing to cope with all of this?
Unfortunately, when there's inflation, when there's high inflation coupled by high interest rates, we've seen most people's mortgages have actually doubled. Unfortunately, how are people coping? So what people rather will do is they just clutch their wallets. They don't spend, and that's what the banks. That's what the banks want, or the central bank. That's what they want. So you do not spend. You put that money in the bank. But I think one of the other key things, and which is what the office. One of the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA), what they're investigating is the banks are not passing on the interest back to the. If there's a high interest, if it costs a lot to borrow, at the same time, you should be passing on a lot back to the people when they save, but the banks are not passing it back exactly. So unfortunately, it's a tit-tat, and the Financial Conduct Authority is actually investigating different banks who are engaging in this practice, or malpractice, if you want to call it. So on that side, it's hitting, mortgages or houses are not really selling. People are rather, getting rid of the houses because they just thought it's not worth them keeping these houses. But at the same time, people are not buying because there's not money to buy these properties. So either way, it's causing this adverse effect on both sides. And again, people are, poverty levels actually risen a lot more now. Now you do get, yes, there's quite high unemployment, employment, but at the same time, you do have like most people taking 2, 3 multiple jobs. So in a way, it's getting people to go out there more and do more things. And unfortunately, this thing just stems crime as well. People are, like I said, taking loans to pay their bills. Houses are not selling, and at the same time, the mortgage rate is at a 15-year high. So it's quite slow, and and the margin is at extremely low levels. So there's a big decline. And again, what the government have not done is they haven't built enough houses. Hence, of course, the government is actually stemming people, bringing out people to get these jobs, provide jobs. Because I think the government is actually using this opportunity as an opportunity to learn. But again, they're feeling the pinch. You've got to grow at the same, why are you trying to grow? But this inflation is quite high, but people are not willing to take on that job, because at the end of the day, the more you work, the more you will be paying back in taxes, and it's not even worth it in terms of, if the inflation is very high, then no matter how much money, your money is as worth as a piece of paper. It's not actually doing very well in your pocket. So it's quite difficult. People are frowning at the government. Government is trying to encourage, but they can only promise. And yeah, you're right. Speaking of the gas prices, on utilities quite high, but it's actually dropped slightly compared to where it was, but it's still quite high. We're still talking about 2, 3 times what people are paying. So that's not a good look overall.
Not really a good look. I must agree with you. Mr. Nufade, let's look at Moody's. Anytime you hear from the likes of Standards and Poor, you hear from the likes of Moody's, the financial space would always need to look back and see what is happening around that space. But we see that some of these ratings agencies are coming up with figures or ratings that are worrisome. Even in the United States, about 16 banks are on the watch, and the possibility of downgrading some banks seems to be imminent. Now, tell us what you think about what Moody's been doing and how you react to some of the financial institutions and the level of stability at this time.
Oh, absolutely. Moody's is a very important agency needed in the world. I think was it last week the Fitch downgraded United States of America's credit rating from AAA to AA plus, something like that, around that, which is still fairly strong. But the minute you got the United States has got a rating weaker than Russia, or even while Nigeria just got recently, the next day got an upgrade, that's not a good look. And of course, Moody took it from the global outlook, they took it to the national level, and they downgraded a lot of banks. But what we need to pay attention to is the banks that downgraded are the regional banks. Okay, so a lot of these banks people haven't probably heard of. We're talking about the Zion banks, for example. However, what people need to pay attention. This is 2009, so we had the last global credit crunch in 2008, and since then, over 530 banks or thereabout have actually folded. And I think this year we had quite a few bank runs, and quite a lot of banks folded as well this year. So again, not great on that side, but I think what people have got to do, if in terms of investors, of course, if you want to invest, so you got to look at the major banks, because due to the regulations, it's very almost impossible for them to fail. That's one. But on the other side as well, if you look at it, there are two things I should be paying attention to again. Number one is these things happened after the earnings, the quarterly earnings have been declared. Okay, so I think we all kind of saw it coming, to be honest. So, and of course, there was a weird massive reaction, jittery in the world stocks index yesterday. A lot of them collapsed. And again, also, it just coincided. It kind of felt like they had a meeting with Italy. Italy just levied a 40% windfall tax on banks because, everyone is thinking about how do we get all this money that we need? How do we get it? And Italy thought, it's just like the UK has been thinking about taxing energy companies. These guys are making record profits in a very, perilous time in this kind of year that we have. But Italy decided, okay, we're going to levy 40% on the biggest banks, and we're going to use that money to take care of the people who've been affected by, as a result of this high inflationary environment where we are. So yes, this is unnecessary, but I think most, there's not much cause for action or for alarm really. But if you are heavily invested in these small regional banks, then I think you are at risk, unfortunately, as well.
Well, it's always interesting to at least have an outlook despite all of these challenges. What is your projection for, let's say, end year and moving on to 2024? There is still this fear that many countries are yet to come back to pre-pandemic times or pre-pandemic levels. And this, to me, I think is taking a while. So what do you think, or what is your projection? What is your outlook, considering all the challenges that we still face?
Sure. So one thing we've got to understand is that the economy leads while the market lags. The market leads while the economy lags. So whatever's going to happen would have happened on the economic side, while on the market side rather, while the economy would have been lagging. Sorry, the economy responds about 18 months later. And you're right. Everyone's been screaming about recession, and I think it kind of come down. But we believe right now that we are in a deflationary period, which is kind of like a general decline in prices for goods and services, mostly associated with also contraction of supply of money and credit. One more thing is the fact that we had a strong Q1, Q2, first H1 half year really. But the second half is showing, all the data is showing weakness in the economy. You know, even though most of the, and of course, if you look at all these corporations as well, they are, yes, the first half of the year, they did a lot of layoffs, okay? And despite the layoffs, it did show in the earnings that, you know, they were able to recoup a lot of funds. But again, growth has stalled. It's showing that the second half of the year will be a little bit slow. Of course, China, which is a huge mega gauge for the world global economy, you know, they call it the world factory. The Chinese PMI in June this year was quite a lousy 46%, which dropped from about 54% in the same June last year. So we yet to hit the level where we are. While the US PMI itself was about 46%, and so it's overall both countries are, you know, which we're talking about world leaders, they haven't really exactly grown. I mean, China says they've grown by like 4.9%, but US has dropped. You know, we're talking about the biggest S&P 500 companies. They've dropped by about 25%. They haven't exactly reached the highs, and there's that notion that there will be a slowdown in the second half of the year, and if at all, we might even hit a recession whereby we have two double negative GDP in two negative quarters of GDP. So if anything at all, I think growth is protracted for 2025. I think 2024 will be kind of like a setting period. What 2025 is when we believe things should start to begin to stabilize. But it's actually going to be still a little bit rough before we get on, because a few markets are hitting their all-time highs right now. But with the data coming out, you could tell that a lot have to be shrugged, and any slight negative news at all, the market just knocks it off by a great deal.
It's a big one, but it's a way to live it. I must thank you, Mr. Lugbenga Onifade, who is the startup founder, the World Hackers. Thank you so much for your time, and do have a productive day.
Thanks for having me.